So we're going to talk about 3.3 or ATP. And I've mentioned this previously in, I believe, the first unit. And so ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is just a molecule that we use as like a currency for energy. Okay, it's used in order for us to do work or movement. And so this is what the basic structure of ATP looks like. Okay, so we have adenine, which is a nucleic acid. And then we have a 5-carbon sugar called ribose. And then we have 3 phosphate groups. And these phosphate groups that are on this one side are extremely important in the source of energy that it creates. And so ATP is actually recycled within a cell and can be reused, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so the bonds between the second and the third phosphate group are really, really important in what we're going to focus on. Okay, and so ATP just couples exergonic reactions into endergonic reactions in order for us to do work. And so the exergonic process drives the endergonic process. And so we break that bond between that second and that third phosphate group in a hydrolysis reaction. Remember, in hydrolysis, we add water to our molecule to form kind of a gap between subunits. Okay, so water is going to be added in between the second and the third phosphate group right here. And it's going to break apart or break that bond between the second and third phosphate. And it's going to transform ATP into ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. Okay. And so the word phosphorylation is going to be used quite a bit in this unit. And so it's just the released phosphate moves to another molecule to give it energy. So that one little phosphate that was broken off of ATP is used to phosphorylate other molecules or give them energy. And so an example, we've used ATP or energy in our last unit with the transport of molecules and active transport, right? In order for molecules to go against their concentration gradient, energy has to bind to that protein in order to make a conformational change to allow things to move across the membrane against their concentration gradient, or low concentration to a high concentration. And so in order for that protein within that membrane can do that, go through a conformational change, it needs to be phosphorylated. Okay, ATP is going to break the bond between its second and third phosphate group and give it to that membrane protein to allow it to make a conformational change to allow things to move across or against, their concentration gradient. And so here's a model or a picture to kind of visualize this. Okay, so we have water here. Here's our ATP molecule, adenine, sorry, I can't pronounce things, ribose, our 5-carbon sugar, and our 3 phosphate groups. Okay, and so water is going to break the bond between our second and third phosphate group. It's going to produce energy. Okay, and so this is going to come from lowering free energy, not the breaking of the bond itself. Okay. And so, like I said earlier, ADP and ATP can be recycled within a cell. And so once ATP, with the addition of water, breaks off that phosphate group, it can do cellular work. But with the addition of that phosphate group and the removal of water through dehydration synthesis, ADP can become ATP via exergonic reaction. So we're going to talk a little bit about the rate of these reactions occurring. And so we talked about the law of thermodynamics, and it's just telling us whether a reaction is spontaneous or not. But it doesn't describe like how fast this reactions occur or the rate of them. And so some spontaneous reactions are going to occur slowly unless we were to add something to them to speed them up. And so the hydrolysis of sucrose to glucose would take like 1,000 years to happen on its own if we didn't add a something to speed it up, right? It would take years for those molecules to break down. Okay, and so what we're going to use is enzymes to do this, these proteins, and they're going to act as catalysts. Is another word that you might have already learned about in anatomy and physiology, hopefully. But if not, we'll talk about it a little bit. And so that's it for 3.3.